sons and daughters, colleagues, veterans will all have a part to play, and more families will know what sacrifice for our nation means.
Britain is preparing for a war it might never see coming. Not the kind with troops landing on shores or bombs dropping from skies, but one waged in silence, in servers, in signal interference, and in the growing space between government promises and public trust. And the deeper that space grows, the more exposed a country becomes, not just to external threats, but to its own unraveling. In the span of just 72 hours, 3 major national alerts hit cities across the UK. Not drills, with tensions rising across the UK and thousands taking to the streets of London right now. It's more important than ever to see the full picture. If you want to stay updated on the situation as it unfolds, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I'm covering the angles the mainstream media might miss, like this video if you believe in unfiltered reporting. Real alerts. Each one pointing to a heightened state of security, each one tightening the sense that something is off. Behind the scenes, intelligence services are tracking a 47% spike in cyber threats. These aren't kids playing with code. These are hostile state actors, using precision attacks aimed not at tanks or soldiers, but at civilian infrastructure, hospitals, energy grids, critical public systems. It's not an accident. It's not random. This is what hybrid warfare looks like. It's slow, deliberate, and engineered not to shock, but to exhaust. And the more people get used to it, the more dangerous it becomes. The latest breach didn't just expose emails or passwords. It cut deep. Criminal records, confidential, sensitive, high-security files, were compromised. This is the kind of breach that doesn't just embarrass the government. It breaks the illusion of control. And once that illusion is gone, so is the public sense of safety. In the world of hybrid warfare, that is the objective. You don't need to shut down a country if you can make its people stop trusting it. And right now, that's exactly what's happening. While cyber threats intensify, the UK's top military officials are redefining what defense means. It's no longer just about trained forces or border security. It's about the entire population. Civilians, families, veterans. The new model of defense is everyone, everywhere, all the time. Total resilience. National cohesion, a whole-of-society approach. Sounds strategic, sounds modern, but in practice, it's hitting a wall, public distrust. People aren't buying it, not because they don't understand the threat, but because the messaging doesn't match the reality they're living. While officials talk about shared sacrifice, citizens see policy moves, like increased military recruitment through migrant populations, that feel misaligned with their day-to-day struggles. There's growing tension between what's being said and what's being done. And that disconnect is creating protests. I know things feel really heavy in the UK right now. There's a lot of division and noise on the streets. But I want this channel to be a place where we can come together. If you want to be part of a supportive community, please subscribe. And like this video to show some love to everyone feeling anxious about the state of things right now. Stay safe out there, everyone. Resistance and rising skepticism. People are asking questions about who's sacrificing, who's benefiting, and why transparency is always promised but rarely delivered. This isn't a political critique. It's a security issue. Because once the public stops believing in the purpose behind the measures, they stop participating in them. And when hybrid warfare is designed to collapse a country from the inside, participation is everything. Russia, according to intelligence reports, is leaning into this model hard. Their playbook isn't just military posturing, it's full-spectrum disruption, cyber operations, disinformation, subtle, systemic pressure. The goal isn't to beat the UK in a traditional war. It's to weaken it so completely from within that it doesn't need to be beaten at all. What makes this dangerous is that Britain's current vulnerabilities aren't primarily technical, they're social. It's not that systems can't be fixed. It's that the population may no longer trust the systems are even worth fixing. This erosion of legitimacy, this sense that the government is speaking a different language than the people, is the soft underbelly of modern national security. Hybrid warfare doesn't blow through the front door. It slips in through the cracks in public faith. The breach of data, the rise in alerts, the government's expanded vision of civilian involvement. These are not isolated developments. They are interconnected signals pointing to a country bracing for conflict, while its citizens feel increasingly disconnected from the mission. And the consequences are mounting. Simulations have already shown how sustained cyber attacks, without a single bullet fired, could bring Britain to its knees. Not through visible destruction, but through cascading failures. Emergency services overwhelmed. Power grids knocked offline. Hospitals paralyzed. Not from lack of equipment, but from lack of functioning networks. And in those scenarios, the most tragic outcomes aren't caused by violence. They are caused by silence, by failure, by systems simply not working when people need them the most. The experts are clear. The strongest cybersecurity won't save a country if its people are divided, misinformed, or apathetic. Resilience isn't just a firewall. It's a population that believes in the fight. Right now, Britain is losing that belief. Public perception is diverging from government intent. Officials speak of readiness, while citizens express doubt. Leaders call for unity, while protests grow louder. The more that policies are perceived as unequal, rushed, or shrouded in vagueness, the more likely people are to check out completely. You've seen the headlines, but the atmosphere down here is completely different. Subscribe so you don't miss the raw footage I'm releasing later this week, and like this video to help push this unfiltered reporting up the algorithm. That's the real danger, because disengagement doesn't look dramatic. It looks like indifference. It looks like people ignoring alerts. It looks like warnings dismissed as overreactions. It looks like trust being so thin that no one believes the system will hold, even if it technically could. The UK's internal fractures, political, cultural, institutional, are being mapped and exploited in real time. Every protest, every rumor, every policy contradiction. Each one adds to a growing narrative that Britain is vulnerable, not because it's weak, but because it's incoherent. And that incoherence is exactly what hybrid warfare is built to target. If a country can't speak with one voice, it can't act with one purpose. And if it can't act with one purpose, it doesn't matter how advanced its defense systems are. The collapse will happen anyway, from the inside out. This is where urgency meets reality. Hybrid threats don't give you years to prepare. They exploit the now, the systems that are already stretched, the trust that's already brittle, the leadership that's already cautious and cornered. In that chaos, even well-intentioned strategies can backfire if they are not communicated clearly and backed by genuine public engagement. People want to be protected, but they also want to be respected, informed, included, and when they are not, suspicion becomes a dominant emotion. That suspicion doesn't just slow down responses, it splinters them. It turns resilience into resistance. The metrics are changing. National strength is no longer just about speed of response or volume of firepower. It's about legitimacy, about whether the population wants to respond, whether they feel their sacrifice will be met with fairness, whether they trust that their effort has meaning. And right now, those conditions aren't guaranteed. That's why the situation is so volatile. Because this isn't a matter of if a hybrid escalation could happen. It's a matter of whether Britain will be able to hold itself together when it does. And holding together doesn't just mean infrastructure staying online. It means the public staying on board, staying involved, staying willing to cooperate under pressure. That doesn't happen through force. It happens through credibility. And credibility is built in the quiet moments, long before the crisis. It's built when data breaches are handled with transparency, not spin. When alerts are explained, not dramatized. When policy decisions are communicated with clarity, not confusion. And when the people being asked to sacrifice are actually shown respect, not told to just trust blindly. Because when people feel heard, they respond. But when they feel managed, they resist. With tensions rising across the UK and thousands taking to the streets of London right now, it's more important than ever to see the full picture. If you want to stay updated on the situation as it unfolds, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I'm covering the angles the mainstream media might miss, like this video if you believe in unfiltered reporting. They disengage. And in a hybrid war, disengagement is the most efficient way to lose. So where does this leave Britain? In a moment that demands clarity, honesty, and leadership that understands the real front lines are not just geopolitical, they are domestic. The public isn't a liability. It's the last line of defense. If trust holds, so does a nation. But if trust collapses, so does everything else. If you've made it this far, drop a comment below. Do you think the government's doing enough to win back public trust? Do you feel informed or left in the dark? Hit like if you think resilience has to mean more than military drills. Share this with someone who thinks cyber attacks aren't a real threat. And subscribe, because the story isn't over and the stakes are only getting higher. So now here we are, at the edge of something Britain hasn't had to face in decades. The prospect of a nation under pressure, not by foreign boots on the ground, but by an enemy that uses your own systems against you. And worse, one that doesn't need to break the law of war. Because hybrid warfare isn't about laws. It's about perception, influence, control without appearing to hold it. And that's exactly what's unfolding. Because this war, if you can even call it that, doesn't declare itself. It creeps. It manipulates. It bleeds into headlines, then disappears into silence. A breach here, a blackout there. Then, slowly, almost invisibly, the institutions you thought were solid start to feel unsteady. Britain's institutions are now being tested not by weapons, but by weight, the weight of public doubt, the weight of broken communication, and the suffocating pressure of trust that's been eroding under the surface for years. Let's not underestimate what that means. This is no longer about whether the government can prevent a cyber attack. It's about whether the public believes them when they say they prevented one. And that's the heart of hybrid warfare. It doesn't matter what's true. It matters what people believe is true. Once belief splinters, it's game over. And let's talk about splinters, because there are plenty. We got public unrest over recruitment policies that seem rushed, out of touch, and vaguely opportunistic, like the government is plugging holes with people it hopes won't ask too many questions. The expansion of military ranks through migrant recruitment has become a lightning rod, not because the recruits themselves are the issue, but because it symbolizes something deeper, a government improvising under pressure, while the public watches with crossed arms and furrowed brows. The messaging is off. The rollout is unclear. I know things feel really heavy in the UK right now. There's a lot of division and noise on the streets, but I want this channel to be a place where we can come together. If you want to be part of a supportive community, please subscribe. And like this video to show some love to everyone feeling anxious about the state of things right now. Stay safe out there, everyone. And the timing couldn't be worse. People are being told this is about unity and shared sacrifice. But when policy doesn't reflect that shared burden, the response is predictable: resistance. That resistance isn't just political. It's structural. Because once civilians begin resisting the idea that they are part of the national defense strategy, the whole thing collapses in on itself. And here's why that matters. Britain can't defend itself alone anymore. Not in this era. Not against this kind of threat. Hybrid warfare doesn't just hit the government. It hits the people, the systems they rely on, the networks they trust, the truth they think they know. Civilian infrastructure is a battlefield now. That's not speculation. That's fact. The attacks are already targeting power grids, healthcare systems, emergency services, and not to knock them out completely, but to fray them, slowly, strategically, so that when the pressure peaks, they don't fail from an outside blow, but from the inside, with no one left willing or able to hold a line. That's the scariest part. The collapse doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be accepted. And that's where the danger is most acute, in the growing acceptance that nothing will change, that the alerts don't mean anything, that the warnings are political theater, that resilience is a talking point, not a plan. Because once the population believes that, hybrid warfare has already succeeded. Let's go back to the breach, the massive data leak that included sensitive criminal records. That wasn't just a cyber incident. That was a precision strike on confidence. You can lock down borders all you want, but if your data is bleeding out through your own systems, what are you even defending? When the public sees these failures, they are not thinking about geopolitics. They are thinking, if the government can't protect its own files, how is it going to protect us? That's not paranoia. That's a fair question. And what's the government doing in response? Issuing alerts, holding press briefings, talking about civil-military integration. But to the average citizen, it all sounds a bit like too little, too late, because none of it directly answers the most important question: who's really in control? Because in a hybrid war, the perception of control is as critical as the actual mechanics of it. And right now, that perception is broken. There's also a psychological layer that's hard to quantify, but you can feel it. The creeping anxiety that this is all part of something bigger, something no one's fully explaining. A growing number of people are asking the same thing in hushed tones. You've seen the headlines, but the atmosphere down here is completely different. Subscribe so you don't miss the raw footage I'm releasing later this week, and like this video to help push this unfiltered reporting up the algorithm. Why now? Why the sudden urgency? And the truth is, it's not sudden, it's accumulated. The pressure has been building for years. The rise in state-sponsored cyber operations, the subtle degradation of public services, the systemic vulnerabilities no one wanted to talk about until they were exposed. Now, it's all out in the open, and people are being asked to trust the same institutions that ignored the early warning signs. That's a tough sell, because when resilience depends on social cohesion, and social cohesion depends on legitimacy, there's no shortcut. You either have it or you don't. And Britain? It's dangerously close to losing it. What happens then? Well, that's where the real consequences hit. If another major breach happens, or worse, a cyber attack that disrupts health services, water supply, or power, how quickly can the government respond with the public still on its side? Because without public buy-in, the response mechanisms grind slower. The recovery becomes harder. The narrative splinters into conspiracy, denial, and finger-pointing. And in that confusion, the next attack doesn't even have to be big. It just has to land. And that's not fear-mongering. That's realism. That's the nature of the threat Britain is facing. The traditional models of national defense were built for different kinds of enemies, visible, uniformed, and direct. This threat doesn't wear a uniform. It doesn't invade in the middle of the night. It waits for apathy, for division, for the kind of national fatigue that makes resistance feel like a waste of time. And that fatigue? It's creeping in. You can see it in the protests, in the tone of the coverage, in the shrinking window of public patience, in the way people talk about the alerts now, not with urgency, but with detachment. So what's the solution? It starts with trust, not just words, but actions, transparency that isn't spun, communication that's actually clear, policies that reflect fairness, not improvisation, and most importantly, leadership that acknowledges a fear and doesn't dismiss it as hysteria. Because fear, when ignored, becomes bitterness, and bitterness becomes disengagement. Britain doesn't need to scare its people into readiness. It needs to involve them, with honesty, with a plan, with some kind of accountability for how things got this fractured to begin with. Because make no mistake, this isn't just a test of infrastructure. It's a test of belief. And if belief fails, no defense will hold. So what's the takeaway here? That Britain is facing a threat unlike any it's seen in the modern era, one that's already inside the system, already sowing doubt, with tensions rising across the UK and thousands taking to the streets of London right now. It's more important than ever to see the full picture. If you want to stay updated on the situation as it unfolds, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I'm covering the angles the mainstream media might miss, like this video if you believe in unfiltered reporting, and already working to undermine the core of national stability. And the only way through it isn't just military strength, or cyber expertise, or rapid response protocols. It's cohesion, the ability to trust, act, and endure as one. Without that, Britain might win battles, but it could still lose a war. So here's a brutal truth. Britain isn't falling apart. It's being pulled apart. Slowly, strategically, and maybe the scariest part, it's happening without most people even realizing it. This isn't an invasion you can film with a news crew. There are no tanks, no explosions, no landmarks in flames. That's not how hybrid warfare works. It's psychological, institutional. It's war without war. And yet, the effects are just as devastating. Because this kind of conflict doesn't need to defeat your army. It just needs to convince your people that your institutions are already defeated, that your government can't keep them safe, that the system is too compromised to care. And when that idea takes root, you don't need bombs. You just need time. And Russia? They have time. Let's not overcomplicate what they're doing. They're exploiting cracks that already exist. The UK isn't being overwhelmed by some foreign master plan. It's being slowly weakened by a very deliberate strategy that targets the one thing every democracy depends on to function: trust. You lose trust in the system, and everything else becomes optional. Compliance? Optional. Patriotism? Optional. Belief in collective responsibility? Optional. And that's exactly the dilemma unfolding across the country right now. Britain is pushing military readiness, national alerts, a vision of civilians as the backbone of homeland defense. And yet, the average citizen hears that and thinks, I'm supposed to defend a system that can't even keep its own data safe. Let's not forget, we're coming off a massive breach. Sensitive criminal data leaked. An entire layer of civil infrastructure compromised. These aren't minor technical hiccups. These are warning signs, visible proof that the very structures meant to protect the public are vulnerable. And when those structures falter, the public instinct isn't to rally, it's to retreat. Retreat into cynicism. Retreat into silence. Retreat into the belief that resilience is just another buzzword politicians use when they don't have real answers. That's the danger. Not apathy, not even anger, but resignation. When people stop fighting, stop questioning, stop caring, because they've already decided that whatever happens, no one's coming to save them. That's how hybrid warfare wins. It's not about victory through domination. It's about victory through collapse. Collapse of trust. Collapse of coordination. Collapse of belief. And if you think that's too abstract, look at what's already breaking down. Britain's security apparatus is on high alert, but the people are not. That's the gap. That's the fracture. You've got intelligence agencies talking about 47% spikes in hostile cyber activity, and civilians shrugging, scrolling, tuning out. Because when leadership fails to connect, even the most urgent warnings start sounding like background noise. And you can't fight a war, even a digital one, when half the country thinks it's all just noise. That's why this moment is so critical. Because what's under threat isn't just infrastructure, it's cohesion. And cohesion can't be legislated. You can't pass a bill and expect the public to suddenly rally behind a fragmented message. Cohesion has to be built, earned, especially when the country is already stretched thin by economic strain, political fatigue, and cultural fragmentation. Now let's talk about the military messaging, the sudden pivot toward whole-of-society defense. Officials are telling families, communities, even school children that they play a role in national security now. And while the strategy makes sense, on paper, it's colliding headfirst with public skepticism. Because when you tell people they're essential to the mission, but don't involve them in the decisions, that's not empowerment. That's pressure without consent. And pressure without consent breeds backlash. You see it in the protests. You hear it in the interviews. You read it between the lines in every strategic shift that lands with more confusion than confidence. And it's not just about policy, it's about legitimacy. Because when you recruit migrants into the military to meet personnel shortages and then talk about national unity and shared sacrifice, people see the contradiction. They see a government trying to solve one crisis by creating another. They see a system that preaches togetherness but operates in secrecy. And that secrecy, that's exactly what hybrid warfare feeds on. Because in a society where information is unclear and institutions are distrusted, the truth becomes whatever narrative spreads fastest. And right now, it's not the government's narrative that's winning. It's the alternative ones, the conspiracies, the distrust, the belief that this is all part of some managed decline. Hybrid warfare doesn't need to create those narratives. It just needs to amplify them. And when trust breaks, people stop acting as a unified population. They start acting as individuals. Self-preservation kicks in. Collective resilience becomes fragmented response. And in that fragmentation, the next attack, whatever it looks like, hits 10 times harder. Now think about the simulations, the ones showing what could happen if cyber attacks hit critical services at scale. Hospitals offline, power out, emergency services overwhelmed. This isn't science fiction. This is what the experts are warning about right now. The scenarios aren't about explosive devastation. They're about quiet failure, subtle collapse. Lives lost not through direct violence, but through inaction, delay, confusion. Because when systems go down and no one believes a backup plan will work, you get paralysis. You get chaos. Not because there's no response, but because no one trusts the response. And at that point, You don't need bombs. You just need doubt. Which brings us right back to the fundamental issue. The erosion of trust is the most effective weapon in modern warfare. Britain could have the strongest cyber tools, the most advanced military technology, the most detailed response plans. But if the public doesn't believe in any of it, it's already compromised. This isn't about technological failure. It's about social legitimacy. And that legitimacy is hanging on by threads, shredded by years of inconsistent messaging, patchwork policies, and the growing perception that leaders are asking for sacrifices they haven't earned the right to demand. You can't mobilize a population that feels left behind. You can't inspire unity with vague threats and recycled rhetoric. You can't ask for belief without showing your work. That's what leadership needs to understand right now. The fight isn't just out there. It's right here. In every conversation, every policy rollout, every unanswered question. Because what Britain is facing isn't just an external adversary. It's an internal reckoning. Can the country re-establish trust fast enough to survive a threat that doesn't slow down? Can the public be convinced that this isn't just more political maneuvering, but a real and present danger that requires real collective resilience? Can leadership move beyond slogans and actually reconnect with the people they expect to defend? Because if they can't, if this becomes just another wave of noise, another string of alerts ignored, another policy met with protest, then it won't matter how advanced the defense systems are. The systems will be fine. The society won't. All right, let's go even deeper, because if you've been following all of this and thinking, it's bad, but it's not that bad, you're already halfway down the path. That's how hybrid warfare operates. It doesn't make a big entrance. It slips in during uncertainty. It relies on doubt. It waits for people to decide, this is probably overblown, or worse, there's nothing I can do. Because when a population reaches that point, when engagement turns into apathy and concern turns into cynicism, that's not resilience anymore. That's resignation. And make no mistake, resignation is contagious. That's a silent epidemic beneath Britain's national defense posture right now. Not just cyber vulnerability, not just institutional strain, but the spreading sense that the country's responses are too slow, too vague, or too disconnected from reality to actually wake. Let's be honest, how many people still take national security alerts seriously? 3 major alerts went out in 72 hours. Think about that. That's not a coincidence. That's an escalation. But how many civilians read the notifications, felt the urgency, adjusted their behavior? Very few. Not because people are reckless, but because they're exhausted, suspicious, desensitized. The trust pipeline between leadership and the population is so corroded that even real warnings land like background noise. That's what happens when communication isn't paired with credibility. And that credibility is what Russia, and any other actor in this space, is looking to dismantle. Not all at once, not with a grand gesture, but gradually, strategically, until it just breaks. Because Britain doesn't fall when an attack hits. It falls when no one believes in the response. And let's talk response. The UK government is trying. You can see it in the briefings. You can hear it in the new rhetoric from defense officials. They are pushing this vision of civilian integration, of a nation that doesn't rely on just a military, but a population that knows how to stay calm, stay informed, stay ready. But here's the issue. You can't build civilian resilience on public confusion. You can't ask people to be the backbone of defense while keeping them in the dark about what's really at stake. You can't roll out national readiness while fueling division with inconsistent messaging and tone-deaf policies. That's where this whole migrant recruitment debate becomes more than just a political story. It becomes a symbol of the disconnect. Because while the government expands its forces by welcoming non-citizens into the ranks, a move many would argue is practical and necessary, it lands in society that's already grappling with a growing sense of inequality, a growing feeling that sacrifices are being distributed unfairly, that policies are reactive instead of proactive, and that cohesion is being asked for but not reciprocated. This is a paradox that keeps coming back. You can't manufacture unity. You have to earn it. And hybrid warfare doesn't need to destroy that unity. It just needs to highlight where it's already unraveling. So here's the uncomfortable reality. If Britain can't repair that trust between citizens and state, between intention and perception, then even the best strategies will buckle under pressure. Because at the end of the day, a resilient society is one that can act quickly, collectively, and confidently. But a fractured society? That's a vulnerability all on its own. You don't need a virus in the network when you've got confusion in the population. You don't need to shut down emergency services when half the country doesn't trust them to show up anyway. You don't need to detonate infrastructure when the public has already emotionally checked out of maintaining it. That's the subtle genius of the threat. It's not just technological. It's psychological. We've talked about the breaches. We've talked about the protests. But zoom out, and what you really see is a country standing on a tightrope, balancing between preparation and paralysis. The machinery of national security is spinning faster. The rhetoric is louder. But the question is, are the people still listening? Because if not, that's a real red flag. And this is where time becomes the enemy. Hybrid warfare isn't about the quick strike. It's about erosion. It waits. It accumulates. It doesn't need you to fail tomorrow. It just needs you to stop believing that failure is preventable. When that belief disappears, your resilience goes with it. That's why this moment matters. That's why these breaches, these alerts, these policy contradictions, they're not just individual incidents. They are symptoms of a deeper condition, one where the population no longer feels aligned with the people making decisions on their behalf. And in that environment, one small disruption becomes a catalyst, a spark that sets off not panic, but passivity. That's what modern adversaries want. Not chaos, not war in the streets, but a quiet, compliant collapse. So what's the path forward? It's not just stronger tech or better alerts. It's not even about more funding. It's about rebuilding legitimacy. And that's the hardest thing to do under pressure, because it requires leaders to slow down, to admit fault, to communicate transparently even when the message is messy. It requires clarity, accountability, real conversations with real people, not just press statements or abstract warnings. It requires turning civilians from bystanders into partners, not just telling them they are part of the solution, but proving it with honesty and inclusion. And yes, that's a long road, but it's the only road that leads to real resilience. Because when the next breach hits, and it won't be the systems that determine the outcome. It'll be the people, how they respond, what they believe, who they trust. That's what this entire hybrid threat is really testing. And right now, Britain's response isn't a complete failure, but it's nowhere near unified. That's a concern. So if you've been watching all of this unfold, the alerts, the public pushback, the rising tension, and wondering why it feels like nothing is moving, the answer is simple. You can't push forward on defense when you're dragging half the country behind you. The public doesn't just need to be informed. They need to be convinced, not through fear, not through force, but through facts, through transparency, through leaders who understand that resilience isn't a speech, it's a relationship. And that relationship, right now, it's strained. It can still be saved. But only if everyone, from officials to citizens, stops pretending like this is someone else's job. Because in a hybrid war, everyone is on the front line. If this resonated, drop a comment. What do you think needs to happen before people start taking these threats seriously again? Is it communication? Is it leadership? Or are we just too deep into distrust to come back? Hit that like button if you're watching this whole situation with one eyebrow permanently raised. Share this with someone who keeps saying it'll blow over. And subscribe, because whatever happens next, it's going to hit fast. And the only way to stay ready is to stay aware.